Scene.
All right, good evening. Happy New Year to everyone. This is our first Planning Commission hearing for 2019. It's January 9th, 2019, 6 p.m., and I will call the hearing to order. We have two items on the agenda this evening. The items that have an asterisk or star are legislative in nature, and we will be making recommendations on those items. The items that do not have an asterisk are administrative, and we will make a decision on those items. We'll start off with a prayer by Mr. Howard and the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Knudsen.
Let us pray. Our Lord, we ask Thee a special prayer to please bless the family of Master Officer Joe Shinners. We ask Thee to please bless his brothers and sisters on the Provo Police Department in their grief and as they take up his strain for the absence he's left. And we ask Thee to please bless Provo City as a whole, that we might be united in our grief with a will to work together to make a more harmonious society. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise and follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, commissioners, we'll go through roll call. Please state your name and whether you have a conflict of interest with anything on this evening's agenda.
I am Commissioner Robert Knudsen, and I have no conflict of interest.
Jamin Rowan, no conflict.
Deborah Jensen, no conflict.
Shannon Ellsworth, no conflict.
Andrew Howard, no conflict.
Thank you, commissioners. All right, our first item on the agenda is administrative, so we will be making a decision on this item. Item 1, Rick Ashcraft requests a conditional use permit for outside storage for a business located at 543 East, 600 South in the light manufacturing M1 zone. This is in the Mazer neighborhood, and Dustin Wright will present item 1.
All right, thank you. So this item came to Provo City Code Enforcement originally as a complaint received by a resident regarding storage of materials at this property. And so here's a outline of where the property is located. 600 South is the southern border there of the property, and 600 East on the right-hand side there to help orient to where the property is located. As part of that, the applicant has submitted this conditional use permit request to make outdoor storage an option for them on the property, and the application requests outdoor storage for their fencing company to store materials related for the business. The M1 zone, which the property is located in, is a light manufacturing zone, shown there in the middle. I've included some of the surrounding zones. There's residential and general commercial and heavy manufacturing surrounding the property here. And so within that zone, there currently isn't outdoor storage that's permitted. all uses within the light manufacturing zone have to be within a fully enclosed buildings, except for those uses that the Planning Commission has deemed as appropriate for outdoor storage, and with a conditional use permit with appropriate screening. And so through looking at this, it's some of the areas where the applicant would like to locate storage, you can see that there's these light rectangular areas on their site is kind of where they're currently storing and what has come to code enforcement for. And so those are the areas where they'd like to continue to store these materials. And
Can you point? Yeah.
yeah, so these lighter areas here, you can see storage materials on the site there. And so they do have a project plan that's being reviewed and will come before you. It was on this item, or this agenda, as item number 3, I believe, but we had that continued so we could get more information on the project plan before we brought it to the Planning Commission. But basically they're proposing to build a warehouse kind of in this general area here on the site. And so the Planning Commission will need to determine what amount of storage and where that storage should be. Staff's recommendation is that there's adequate screening for any outdoor storage, that it includes opaque fencing that would be a minimum of 6 feet high. The screening should be on all sides of the storage areas as to have it not be visible from the street or adjoining properties. So in the staff report, I've included some recommended conditions that you could place on it if you felt it was appropriate to have outdoor storage in this light manufacturing zone. So I could read through those if you'd like. First one, storage materials must be screened, surrounded by fencing, as to not be visible from streets or adjacent properties, like I mentioned. 2, outdoor storage shall not be located in any required setback or area required for landscape buffer by section 1434-300 of the Provo City Code. All outdoor storage shall be screened by an opaque fence that is 6 feet in height. All outdoor storage areas shall be shown on a site plan that is approved with a project plan application. So that would be the project plan application we'd want them to include on that, where the storage areas would be, so that we could verify that it meets these other conditions as far as not being within a setback or required landscaped area. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Wright? Mr. Howard?
Has the applicant been made aware of these proposed conditions?
So the staff report gets sent out to the applicant, so they should have a copy.
I guess we can ask them, have they expressed a willingness to comply with the proposed conditions?
I haven't gone over them with the applicant.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Rowan?
You included in the staff report just one item of relevant history, a variance request back in 2006 to allow storage sheds to be built in the required setback, and that was denied. Was that for this particular piece of property or just in the light manufacturing zone citywide, or?
Yeah, that was for this specific property. The request was to allow for storage sheds for the storage materials to be within.
By this was the request made by this applicant, or?
I believe it was.
Okay.
I have one question. Could you just clarify what the boundaries of this site are? Because some of the areas you pointed to look like they're in residential conservation.
Yeah, so this map, kind of the highlighted blue area, shows the parcels that the applicant uses. And so you can note that the 3 corner properties there are excluded. So if I switch back to the zoning map here, that's this top corner piece, this parcel, and then this one down here are separate property owners.
So the blue area in the upper left-hand corner, is zoned residential conservation, but they're storing materials there?
Correct. That's the current zoning on that property.
And does residential conservation allow for light manufacturing to store products outside?
Isn't that line just hard to see?
When the residential conservation zone was put into place, it included businesses and industrial uses, some things that weren't just residential.
So they were grandfathered in?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so
thank you.
the outdoor storage, though, is what they're requesting for a conditional use permit within the light manufacturing zone, the residential conservation zone. I don't believe it allows for outdoor storage. And so that would be this area here where anything's being stored. If the Planning Commission were to grant a conditional use permit for outdoor storage, that'd be for the light manufacturing zone. And so that would have to be moved onto that property in the areas that you guys determine that would be appropriate for that.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Any other questions for Mr. Wright? Ms. Ellsworth?
The bottom right corner where I think it's Rusty's Motorcycles, does that parcel apply to what we're doing here?
No, that parcel's excluded from that.
Do we know
That's
why?
a separate property owner, so the applicant
really?
is just requesting for their property that they
Oh.
utilize for this request.
Fair, okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Wright? All right, thank you. I'd like to invite the applicant, RC Family Holdings, Rick and Christina Ashcraft, to present item 1.
Thank you. I'm Rick Ashcraft, property owner as well as business owner. Been in this location for 18 years, operating as a fence and deck supply. For material sales, we have a retail location there with a showroom there, as well as distribution yard. Just wanted to point out just a point of interest. We do have a vested interest in the neighborhood. Had my daughter, son-in-law, 2 homes away for a while. Several of our employees also live in the neighborhood. So we say we've been there 18 years trying to, I think, clean up the community, clean up the neighborhood. We started out with a dilapidated fence there, vehicles parked around cinder block building, and I think it's changed over the last 18 years. As far as the plan there, it's a little off, little deceiving. That portion up there in that residential area on the left-hand corner, that is not our property. What we are applying for is the part to the right there, and then in the front.
There might be a pointer there that you could use
Let's
to.
see if I can figure it out. So this portion right here, this is not our property here. Our property would come down like this and right here around. And then, right there, and then, yeah. So it doesn't include Rusty's, that corner, and it does not include this portion here. That is not our property. So it'd just be this portion that's in the light manufacturing zone. It's ours, so.
Whose property is that?
Which one?
So that's not your materials in the upper left corner?
This property here belongs to, the owner is Ron Fackler. So he's owned that for, I think, many years. So that would be grandfathered in there. We do lease part of the property from him, but that property would be Ron Fackler's.
So are those your materials currently on this image?
They are,
We see there, but
yeah.
you would, were this to be approved, you would move the materials off that piece of property into.
That portion is leased, so that part's been grandfathered in. So he's been storing materials there for, I don't know how many years.
Grandfathered into what? Into light?
In for outside storage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We can clarify that with staff. Commissioners, any questions?
So where would the
Howard?
proposed fencing be if it were put in, according to the conditions?
So right now, give you an idea, this property is about 8 feet lower than the surrounding property. So there's a retaining wall that runs along this line here, about an 8-foot retaining wall, and it has a 6-foot privacy fence on top of it right now. So it's about 14 feet down below there. So you can see the retaining wall and then the privacy fence on top of there.
That's a pretty high wall.
Very high, yeah. So pretty difficult to see any materials or anything in there.
So maybe I'm just a little bit confused about the source of the complaint, not in terms of who, but just the nature of that complaint that brought this, kind of put the process in motion to bring this to us. And, were they, and maybe just more about the nature of the property, is there a fence that currently goes all the way around already that blocks?
Yes, yes. Up in the front property along 6 South, that is not a opaque fence. It's just a chain link fence
So,
in the front.
okay, so maybe my next question would be, in addition about understanding what is currently there, how do you feel about the staff recommendations that are outlined in the staff report? What's your response to those?
Yeah, I think we're fine with that, to put in a opaque fence. Be something we'd definitely be willing to do in the front there.
Can you point out to me, just again with the pointer on the previous map, where you currently have a fence like the one we just saw in the picture versus a chain link fence right now?
So the fence that you saw in the picture goes around here and down to here. The fence is just chain link right now. It goes around this corner on 6 South there.
And as far as you're aware, is again, the nature of the complaint involving the material that's visible through the chain link fence rather than or do you not know?
I don't know any particulars about it. They just said that there was a complaint, so we have this material, along here. We've had it. It's been that same place for about 18 years. So, and even when we came in 2006, what we were wanting to do was to build a building around that, just to protect the materials more on that. So,
I guess I have one question. In the staff analysis, there's a comment from the fire marshal that advises that large stacks of lumber be kept away from the edges that may be close to another structure or neighboring residence, and that the yard be kept clear so that fire apparatus could navigate through if needed.
okay.
It seems like that would preclude storage on that leased piece of property that you're using right now.
Okay, so as far as access, fire department, we do have gate. They can come in through here. Having the materials up against on the perimeter would grant them greater access. The materials that we're stocking there is actually a composite material, so it's called Trex on there. So the combustibility of that, it would be far less than wood. And then again, as far as the perimeter here, like I say, we do have an 8-foot concrete block wall with the 6-foot privacy fence on that, which would definitely provide a buffer, for that.
Thank you. Ms. Ellsworth?
What time do you close your operations typically each day?
At 5 p.m.
Gotcha. And I don't know if this is a question for you or someone else, but I wonder why there was a complaint filed for your property and no complaint was filed for Rusty's motorcycles?
I don't know. I don't know. I think there's a big disparity between what we're trying to do, cleaning up. Even when we purchased this property on the corner to clean that up, I mean, it looked the same. We hauled off a lot of things trying to clean it up and make it look better. Like I said, we distribute product, throughout the United States and Canada. We regularly bring in people from across the country to come into our facilities to train them on the product. So our goal is to make it look nice. When we have these clients come in there. So that's what we're hoping to do with that corner as well, and redo landscaping and make it look better. So hopefully be good neighbors as well. So.
Great. Any other questions from the commissioners? If not, thank you, and we will invite you back up if there are any additional comments you'd like to make after the public
Thank you.
comments. Thank you. All right, we'll open this up to public comments at this time. Is the Mazer Neighborhood Chair present? Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to item 1? Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to item 1? All right, seeing none, I will close public comment and turn this back over to the commissioners for discussion.
I have a question of staff. Staff, are you allowed to say more about the nature of the complaint in terms of?
Yeah, just that we received a complaint. I don't have a lot of details, if that's what you're looking for on it.
Looking to know, was the complaint about, again, on that 600 South, is it 500 East corner, where there's the chain link fence, so you don't know enough information about?
And my understanding is just that it was a complaint about outdoor storage on the site, and so I don't know if there's a specific area that's more offensive than another. I guess I don't have an answer for that.
Mr. Howard?
I've driven down by that area, and the business seems like it's reasonably run, especially for the area it's in. Seems like it's a pretty good neighbor and fits with the neighborhood. Across the street, there's a steel mill with all kinds of stuff out there, so I think, I'm inclined to move in this direction.
Ms. Ellsworth?
I'm inclined to administer as fewer conditional use restrictions, because this is one of the better maintained properties in that area. I feel really stupid asking them to do so much when their neighbors look less than hospitable.
Any other comments? Mr. Rowan?
Are there, Ms. Ellsworth, are there particular conditional recommendations that you don't feel as strongly about, or? I mean, 1 and 3 strike me as pretty similar. There's 4, but they don't strike me as 4 really distinct.
Yeah, I guess there's not a whole lot I would change. I just feel like the neighbors are needing similar or more restrictions. So I'm trying to see how we can be fair at administration here.
I guess I had a question for
File a complaint on that.
I had a question for staff about the landscape buffer. What landscape buffer is required for this use?
So the transitional development standard in our code requires a 10-foot landscape buffer if it's adjacent to a residential zone. And so the property lines that are adjacent to the one-family residential or the residential conservation would fit into that requirement. And then as far as setbacks go, the light manufacturing zone has a 10-foot front yard setback, a landscape setback, and a 15-foot street side yard landscape setback. So those would be what we're referring to there.
So essentially the rear setback, where it's adjacent to residential, is 10 feet, and that's to be a landscape buffer. Is that correct or no?
Did you say the rear setback?
Yeah.
So just any property line that's adjacent to a residential zone would need that 10-foot buffer, landscape buffer. And then just on the street sides, there's the zone has landscape setback requirements of 10 feet for the front yard and 15 feet for a street side yard.
Is there a way to show us where they're not in compliance with the recommendations that you've suggested in the staff report? What would need to be done exactly?
Okay, yeah, so along these residential zones, there would need to be a 10-foot landscape buffer.
So that is the actual language of the code, but since that is a historic industrial use, it seems like a 10-foot landscape strip along there would interrupt the
Yeah.
commercial use of the properties. So I think that's legitimate here, but again, that is a residential zone, but I have no doubt that that's been used for industrial uses for a long time.
I agree, and especially since it's buffered by that parking lot and that's multifamily, it's not necessarily like this historic conservation element. I don't think that we need to apply a buffer on that corner.
Sir, are you part of the public comment?
My name is Jared Anderson. I am the attorney for the applicant. He's asked me to address that setback proposal, if I may. It is actually the only proposed condition that is of some concern to Mr. Ashcraft, especially as concerns the southwest corner. The 10-foot or 15-foot setback does not seem to serve the traditional purpose in this instance for a few reasons. First of all, the nature of the property is such that there is existing sidewalk and grass. Now, Mr. Ashcraft believes that the property line is actually his fence line. But as you can see here, sidewalk and grass that creates, and we didn't measure it, but it is close to 10 feet currently. There is no residential on either side, here or here. The material that is stored here is neatly stacked, tarped, Trex. It is on pallets. It is less noticeable, in our opinion, next to the fence than if you were to push it 10 feet away from the fence, because then it becomes more visible from all sides.
That's not an area where you would need that 10-foot setback.
Well, as I understand, I may be wrong, but I thought he said from the street it's 15.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
On the side street, correct? We're talking about the 15-foot.
So my understanding is that it would be 15 here and 10 here. We would ask the commissioners to consider removing that as a condition. The other issue that is a little bit of a conflict is the fire marshal has stated that the yard should be set up so that fire apparatus could navigate through it if needed. That is another reason why the material is stacked along the fence line, so as to create open area here for vehicles to ingress and egress. As this is the main entrance here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, as I'm looking at the site, I'm just trying to figure out where a 10-foot setback would be an improvement. Here you have they showed us a picture of that fence. I mean, would we be asking them to tear down the fence and move it back 10 feet and then landscape this? I can't understand the purpose of that. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that regulation. I don't know that it does any.
The landscape would be on the property owner's side of the wall, correct? Right. So it would be a buffer, physical, auditory, visual,
On who?
in addition to the wall.
But that's a good point. Because of the change in grade, there's a significant transition already.
Yeah, putting landscaping right here, I just can't see what that would do to improve anything. Yeah, you'd never see it. Right. Exactly. So it seems to me, going back to your original comment, so if anything, that number 2 would be the one that I would recommend not including on a motion.
I concur with that. I think that's how we should make the motion, is we should approve it with item 1, 3, and 4 and exclude number 2.
Why would you not want to require a setback? There's a setback required along 600 and also the side street.
Oh,
If you would remove the setback requirement, they can literally build the fence right up to the sidewalk, correct?
Well, they can build the fence to the sidewalk now, and so the question is, do you want to apply a setback, which typically applies to a building, to outside storage? You don't have to do that. You don't, the planning commission doesn't have to do that, and I think the attorney makes a good point.
So if we excluded 2, would that fill the bill?
Yes.
Maybe what I'm getting hung up on is the landscape buffer part
It's
of
confusing.
that.
The language.
It it suggests that, if you had the 10-foot setback right here for requirement, for example, you'd have to have, not that they have any stacks right here, right now, but you'd have to, I guess the question for me is, does that language suggest they would have to put a 10-foot buffer between the fence and wherever they might store something right here?
Yes.
If so, that doesn't make any sense to me, is I guess what I'm saying. So I don't know if that means we strike number 2 altogether or just strike the landscaped buffer part of the language. But it seems to me that I'm inclined to.
I guess I'm going to beg to differ a little bit, because when I think of, and some of you may recall, when Bear River Storage wanted their storage facility on State Street, new facility built, and they tried to reduce the tree requirement or the landscape requirement. Is this not a similar situation? Are you not saying that you would reduce the landscape requirements? I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, I guess
here.
I'm just saying, looking at this particular piece of property, a 10-foot landscape buffer
Right there isn't going to do anything.
seems like it's just an exercise in, futility, like asking them to do something that would serve no purpose. Right here, if you had a 10-foot landscape buffer, because this is already so far below the grade of this residential property, and because they already have, is it 6-foot high fence? Is that? I mean, no one's going to see the landscaping that they might put in, and maybe I'm not familiar enough with what type of landscaping. If you put shrubs in there or grass in there, what does it accomplish exactly? In fact, the closer you get the materials, were they to stack them here to the fence, the less likely this residential or anyone on the sidewalk would be to see them because of the change in grade and the fence.
Yeah.
I think he's made a considerable effort already to ameliorate this situation. I'd hate to have this meeting be punitive in that regard.
Commissioners, motion, further discussion?
Madam Chairman, I would like to make a motion.
Mr. Howard?
I would like to move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use permit for item number 1 for an outside storage for a business located at 543 East, 600 South in the light manufacturing zone, Mazer neighborhood, subject to recommendation number 1, number 3, and number 4, as listed in the presentation,
In the staff
in
recommendation.
the stack recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a second for Mr. Howard's motion? Seconded by Mr. Knudsen. All those in favor of approving item 1?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, so item 1 is approved, and that was unanimous. All right, item 2 is a legislative item, so we will be making a recommendation to Municipal Council on item 2. The Provo City Economic Development Department requests a zone change from the Regional Shopping Center SC3 zone to the Interim Transit-Oriented Development, or ITOD zone, for approximately 14 acres located at 2300 North University Parkway. This is in the Cartersville neighborhood, and Mr. Ardmore will present item 2.
Before Aaron makes any comments, I'd like to just say a few things. As the Planning Commission is aware, this property has been discussed multiple times in your meetings about what to do with it, what would be the appropriate zoning, how it should be used. And this application that has been initiated by the staff is actually an outgrowth of those discussions that the Planning Commission has had. As we're all aware, the bus rapid transit system is now installed along University Parkway, and there's a station in very close proximity to this property. And with that change in the transportation network, it now begs the question as to how this property should be rezoned, or is the current zoning correct or appropriate. In meeting with the applicant and taking into consideration discussions that the Planning Commission has had, staff felt that it made sense for this lighter gray area to have the opportunity to be zoned to the ITOD zone and not SC3. As you know, the SC3 zone currently allows residential uses, and the property owner could develop residential within the SC3 zone up against the property, but that only allows for 20% of the SC3 area. This obviously would change the zoning to ITOD for these 14 acres. As part of this discussion, there would be a development agreement that would take away the opportunity for additional residential within the remaining SC3 because of 14 acres going into a fairly intense residential use. So it was based on these ideas and concepts that we've been discussing that staff has brought this application forward.
Just to add to that, so as you're well aware, they have an approved plan for the mix development with market changes and with discussion with staff, like Bill was speaking about. They've revised their plan, which has initiated this zone change. So the north and east portions, like Bill addressed, would go to ITOD zoning. Bill mentioned the development agreement that would need to be required, as addressed in your staff reports. The three main things that would need to be in there are on the screen now. One of them is what Bill talked about of the SC3 zone not having any residential use for the remainder of their project. In addition to that, with discussions with the developer and economic development are aware of this, that the 10% affordable units would be required or cash in lieu. And that the third is more of a site plan. In the future, a site plan will be coming forward to you guys, a revised site plan. It's not accompanied with this. They just want to get moving on the commercial end of the development. But in that future site plan, they would need to dictate that original road that's in the approved plan, that remains as traffic flow around the site. As I addressed this in my staff report, we think this makes sense. It does provide some good residential product to go alongside the commercial that's been approved. The ITOD zone gives us good regulations to how that will look and how it will develop and intermix with the commercial end of the project. So we've recommended approval.
So the ITOD zone was adopted in around 2009, and it was put on the ground at that time, down at the intermodal station in that area. So it sat dormant for many years, and just in the last few years, development has started taking place in that zone. So the Startup Crossing building is within the ITOD zone. The NeighborWorks project to the west of that includes townhomes and stacked condominiums, are in that zone, and both of those projects have adhered to the design criteria of the ordinance. So we felt like since that property was pre-zoned and the product we ended up getting, having complied with our requirements, seems to be doing what it's intended to do, we thought it would make sense to go ahead and pre-zone this property.
And if we might add a third staff member to address you before you open it up to the applicant. David Day is here from Public Works to address sewer needs and capacity.
Great, thank you. Mr. Day.
David Day with Provo City Public Works. you remember the discussions we've had regarding sewer capacity in Provo and the analysis we've gone through, and I think all of you have a copy of those results that we came up with. Public Works is also in support of this with the condition that our sewer system is able to handle whatever density the ITOD would add to our system. So we would need to understand that really clearly before we could say, yeah, our sewer system can handle that. So just that one caution, that the ITOD density could exceed our capacity to handle the sewer. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that there is downstream capacity issues that cost money to fix, and so all of our current funding is going elsewhere, and so this one is, in a distant future to deal with. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Madam Chair, we would then recommend that if there's a development agreement on this project, that there be a fourth condition or flag or language that talks about limited sewer capacity, and it may be up to the developer to have to improve the system even downstream from where this property is.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, questions for staff? Ms. Ellsworth?
I'm not sure if you want to answer this, or I can ask the applicant, but I'm curious why the applicant is economic development and not the developer?
Because community development initiated this and asked economic development to be the applicant.
And you briefly mentioned the design regulations for the ITOD zone. Are there any proposed changes to that in the works, or are we set with what we have?
Yeah, I think the design changes you guys have been looking at and reviewing are only in the downtown zones.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I'm curious, what was the impetus for this 10% of residential units must be income restricted to 60% of average median income?
Thank you for asking that question. The City Council has been having a lot of discussions and very long discussions about housing affordability in Provo, even to the point where they've been asking staff about inclusionary zoning and enacting inclusionary zoning. And in those discussions we've had with the City Council, we've said, yes, we can move in that direction, but one thing you can do right now is anytime somebody needs a zone change, their willingness to help provide affordable housing could be impetus to approve their zone change. So it's consistent with those discussions.
Okay. Yeah, does this kind of density conflict with the sewer then? The sewer capacity?
Well, Public Works isn't positive yet because we would need some type of impact calculations from the developer for them to be able to do their modeling. And then that's why the engineering is saying we need to hedge our bets.
Okay.
Mr. Rowan?
I don't know if this would be useful to others, but just in terms of helping me reimagine the site as it might look. I mean, I understand we'll see a site plan further down the road were this to go through, but the difference, what do you see as the primary differences with what this change might bring in terms of how the site plan might function versus what we saw before? I mean, one of the things I really like about what I see is that this is in the back instead of up on the road, so I really like that a lot, and I like that, there's this road that is a circulation to get residents where they need to be, but also people who are coming here for business or commercial purposes. But do you imagine, or can you help us imagine kind of key site plan differences that we might anticipate from the previous version to what we're seeing now, other than the obvious ones that we're looking at?
Well, the ITOD zone is primarily residential, and the commercial uses or opportunities you have within that zone are really intended to be more ancillary to the residential uses. As we looked at this, as the planning staff looked at this property and the larger area, it just seems like this really isn't the SC3 zone. It's never been the SC3, the regional shopping area that it was originally intended to be. A lot of that, I think, has to do with access in and out of the site. That hasn't been good historically. Fortunately, the BRT project going in not only has brought mass transit to the site, but I think it's actually helped and fixed the access problems going in and out. It's actually better now than it's ever been. But the residential, this area would then be largely or exclusively residential, where before, under the older, former scheme, it would have been still residential, but probably more just a smaller area. Because it's ITOD zoning, it would probably be more vertical and less horizontal.
Yeah.
Again, and the design guidelines help to achieve that. You've seen some pretty horizontal concepts on this, I think, in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in here, more vertical, the possibility of having ground floor commercial, possibly.
Yes.
And then also, you have, I just did the calculations on the high end of the numbers that you projected would be about 35 units per acre. Is that your calculation? If you have, at one point in the staff report, the proposed zone change will allow significant residential development, 400 to 500 units on 14 acres would be about 35 per acre or so.
Yeah,
Is that the right calculation, or?
Those are the numbers that have been thrown out by the developer. Understand that in the ITD zone, they could do even more than that.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the
Right.
ITD zone doesn't say 35 units to the acre, and they could even go higher than that.
Right, I wouldn't be opposed to higher for sure. Again, I should have refreshed myself on the ITOD zone. What's the bottom per unit number?
There's no density calculation in the ITOD zone or our downtown zones. There's no density calculation. What limits your density is building height, your parking ratio, those types of things. But there is nowhere where it says you have to at least do this many units per acre, and there's nowhere where it says you can't do more than that many units per acre.
Okay.
So effectively, sewer capacity is going to be one of the limiting factors on this development.
And you've designed enough of these to know that parking is also a big part of that equation, right?
The tail that wags the dog, yeah.
Exactly.
Any other questions for staff and the commissioners? Okay. If not, I will invite Mr. Holmes to talk about item 2.
Madam Chair and Planning Commission members, do you have any questions of the economic development staff? To answer the question that was answered, I guess we got the short end of the straw as to whether it was our office or community development. You should also know that, and again, not to influence your discussion, but also part of this was a discussion earlier with the council and just trying to move the project forward through the system. The developer is here, and obviously at the end of the day, it is their project, not ours. As Mr. Pepperoni had indicated, approximately 10 years ago, the council and the planning commission, not this planning commission, but a former planning commission, did rezone about 69 acres west of University Avenue south of 3rd South to that ITOD. And part of this discussion is we had 2 neighborhood meetings last week with the neighborhood, we'd really like to look at the pictures. It's like, we would too. And part of this is do we trust and are we comfortable with the ITOD zone as it's currently written? Because that's what they'd have to comply with. They'd have to bring in a site plan. They'd have to go through this process with the Planning Commission, with the design review, neighborhood meetings, all those things they'd have to go through to meet those requirements. Relative to the sewer, there's been at least a couple of meetings on that, and the developer understands that there are some capacity issues downstream. Those exist now, and this project, because of where it is and where those sewer issues are there further south, my understanding, and David, you correct me, that it would more than likely, the developer will bear the lion's share of that, but the city also, whether this project happens or not, the city needs to do some things to fix those sewer capacity issues. And it's not actually at the plant, that's part of it, it's really the capacity of those lines further south, and so that they'll have to work together on that. The number of units, correct, Mr. Rowan, is about 500 what they proposed, but again, there are no numbers being approved tonight because it's just the zoning. It is about 35 units to the acre. Interestingly enough, under the previously approved plan, with the 20% rule and with the hotel units, if you counted those as residential also, because by and large they are, but they're still commercial, would be about 410 units. So again, it's about an increase of about 90. So that, unless you have any other questions of me, I know there are some neighbors here. I don't think the neighborhood chair is here, but she was at the meeting on last Thursday evening, and so there was quite a bit of discussion on that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Any questions for Mr. Holmes? No, thank you. All right, I will open this up to public comment then. Is the neighborhood chair for the Carterville neighborhood present? Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to this item? Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this item? And if so, please step to the podium and announce your name and place of residence.
My name is Dave Nyman. I'm representing the Motion Picture Studio, which essentially is, there we go, which is this entire property line right here. We have a few concerns. Some of it is the fact that we haven't seen a site map, so we don't know what the impact on us is going to be. We're concerned about the privacy issue. We were previously buffered. This entire back area had all the shopping center, and so we were kind of not so visible to the street. Now it's wide open, we are visible, and we don't know what it looks like once the units are in place, what kind of visibility we will have. I don't know, I haven't heard if the developer planned to put up a privacy fence along that fence line, but that's something that we would certainly like to see if it's going to come right up against our property. We're also concerned about the sound. Again, having the purpose for our facility is for filming. So we understand that there's ambient noise that's going to be around, but by having a buffer in place, it lessens that a little bit. We're also concerned about the height of the buildings because we have sight lines as we're filming and doing activity. Suddenly we have people looking down on our property, and we also may have buildings that are in the way of what we're trying to accomplish. And obviously security in general is a concern. If there's that dense amount of people, what is that going to do? Are we going to have people, trying to climb over the fence or trying to get into our lot? We are under 24-hour surveillance, and we have cameras, but as most people know, those end up being more forensic as opposed to preventive in terms of, preventing people from getting onto your property. And the last concern we have, the BYU Civil Engineering Office has been in touch with the city on this issue, but currently we're about at our maximum with the culinary water supply now, and with this development being added, it's going to be required that a loop be created, and we obviously don't want to incur the cost of that loop. And things have been changing, and I know that the civil engineer has made some recommendations to David Day, and I believe Brian Torgerson has been involved in that as well, to make sure that that's done correctly. And obviously our concern is that our needs are met and that we don't bear the liability, the financial liability of putting that water line in. Because currently things are things are good for us, but if a change is made that we're not asking for, we don't want to pay for that expense. And also the storm drain. That should rest entirely on the developer. Our property drains just fine right now, but we're concerned if something is in place that might affect us as well.
Can you point out your property line real quick?
So this is all our property, all this whole area here, right up against the river. So it starts here and goes all the way back along here and out to the road. This is our main entrance to get into our facility.
And then over to the river.
And it's, yeah, all the way over to the river. And currently there's a chain link fence all along this area here. Our understanding was that the residential was going to be in this area, which has less of an effect on us because the majority of our filming is back in this area. So we didn't think that it would conflict with what we're doing. But we don't know if residential is filling this entire area. We just don't know what kind of an impact that's going to have on us.
Let me apologize for those golf balls that I,
We get a few of those.
Thank you, Mr. Eman. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to item 2?
I'm Carl Bacon, former director of BYU Development, over 20 years involved there. I've been involved in many, many multi-million-dollar projects at the university. Also, one of the developers of Rock Canyon Temple Estates, which is up 2230 North, past the temple, red units there, which is a quality project, and also involved with Trellis on the Green, which is right off of the third hole there of the country club. I'm more interested, I became interested when I heard that this project was finally going to be developed. It's kind of a graveyard. And I'm interested in, as David Gardner is, who's my partner, and I think every one of you may know David Gardner, is what is the project going to look like? Are we going to say to ourselves when it's all done, whoever allowed that to happen? Or are we going to be proud, saying this is a beautiful addition to our city? That's concerning to me, and I would hope for everyone. This is an entrance to Provo. It's a major project as far as I'm concerned, and I want the developers to be excited about making this a quality project. I don't know what their intent is, certainly is to make money, but I was impressed with one of the representatives the other night as he made his presentation. But I also asked, where's the design? What is it going to look like? My projects that I've been involved with as a developer have been quality. And this should be of interest to every one of us. What is it going to look like? And we have, of course, an issue of a lot of folks that will be involved, some 500 units. That's huge. So I'm not against development, but I'm very concerned about inappropriate or development that shouldn't be part of the city. And my new position that I've been asked to be part of by the Mayor of Provo and others is the director of the City Foundation. We will be finding projects for this community, which are quality. And we'll go out and try to raise money without tax involvement, taxpayers' involvement. And so that's the exciting thing about what I'm involved with. And I said, I hope this will be an exciting project as well for us, that we will be proud of. Does that make sense? Is that important to raise as an issue? I hope it'll be right there at the top of it. And we have a lot of other technical things that need to be addressed. But I hope, number one, how is this going to represent our community? The developers aren't part of our community.
Right.
They're not members of our community. And although I kind of like who I've heard from recently, they're still developers. Is it responsible development? I have not heard one of them say, this is going to be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to this item?
Planning Commission, this is Trellis on the Green right here. And it is a very high quality development, and that is where Mr. Bacon lives.
Hi, my name is Russell Warren. I live on Carterville Road. My house looks directly onto this property. I share this gentleman's concern about aesthetics, and I trust that the committee will keep that in mind. Keep in mind that the entry down University Parkway is, for many people, their first view of the city. In general, I am cautiously in favor of the zoning change, understanding that the devil's in the details, and I plan on keeping an eye on it in the future. But I do want to say that we do need more medium and high density development in the city. When I moved to Provo 7.5 years ago, I was single, and the only place I could find to live, even though I'm a professional, I teach at UVU, the only place I could find to live was a one-bedroom apartment because there just was not enough housing for young professionals. And my brother now recently graduated from BYU with a degree in cybersecurity. He's in the same boat that I was 7 years ago, young professional. He has to live in my basement. And so I like the idea of more development in Provo that can cater to a variety of income levels, including the low income stipulation the council is asking for, because we do have a housing shortage that's hitting our population in their late 20s and early to mid 30s very hard, and it's very hard to keep these people here in town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment?
I'd like to comment, please. My name is Paul Riddle. I've wandered through every piece of that ground for 60 years. I started in 1957 when my family moved there. We have property adjacent. It's actually in Orem City. We boundary connect to Provo City there. And from the perspective of being a good neighbor, I've got some concerns. I'm going to say my opinion is this is too much, too quick, too fast to approve this and go forward with the potential for the numbers that we're talking about. I was quite interested in the perspective of the first question, which was why would community carry this, and why are they carrying the water for the developer? There's a maximization of the profit on this that I think is being considered above all else, and the quality of the development shouldn't be based on the tax dollar return always. Even though that's part of the equation and part of the element, I think the quality of the performance of this property is really going to need to be detailed very closely before it could be considered and approved at the level of units that are being talked about. Currently, the existing boundary is buffer between the BYU property and my property, which adjoins to BYU, and I have 6 acres that also adjoins to Provo there. And we've enjoyed a rural setting that's changing, the world's changing, I get all that, but we really have to do it well. There's currently a 40 to 50 foot buffer between BYU and this development in the shopping center, except for where the quarry climbing wall went in, and it was allowed to go right up next to the city of Orem. So we have residential housing units who look right out in their front yard into a 3-story block wall that has no decorative elements at all, elements on the roof. This is what I'm afraid we could have if we have an approval today for something like this that puts that many units in there. Rough mention was made of vertical versus horizontal. Of course, what vertical means is how many levels? How many levels are the parking structure, and what's the noise level and the lighting elements that happen when you have 3-4 story or higher elements that would require this kind of density for this many units per acre in these elements. So I think there's a whole lot more planning that should go on before anything like this has happened. I think, my perspective and my property is in Orem, but we all want to be a good neighbor and we want to do the best we can. And when I do look out into this property from my property, I would like to see a quality development. In my application and in my career, I work with architects, builders, and developers, primarily for commercial construction. I travel 3 states in Utah, Idaho, and Nevada. So in my life and career, I've seen good, bad, and ugly. And I've seen the beautiful streetscapes of Boise, Idaho, where you know, we don't all have, you know, J.R. Simplot and Joe Albertson to buy up the city lands and landscape the city, Provo City, like, you know, we maybe should have years ago. I've seen the best of Boise, and I've seen the worst of Las Vegas in my travels. And I'd like to see Provo continue to be a really beautiful place. This could be a crown jewel for a development here if we do it right and do it well. I think it's too much, too quick, too fast right now. I think it takes a lot more planning and a lot more detail before we could say, for instance, what the backside of the retail is going to be as it faces the residential, and how the traffic flow will impact with that many units. Because I gotta guess that when UDOT came through and figured the calculations for that, they came in on a passenger car count for every intersection there. This would have a huge impact with that many units. Not everybody's going to be on that bus, and we see the empty bus drive by every day, and I kind of watch it and look at it, and it's of interest to me to see how it's going to be used and how much. It'll get better over time, but in the meantime, pretty much everybody's in their cars, and those intersections are going to be really heavily impacted if we overdo the density in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riddle.
I'm Eric Davis, and I'm in the General Counsel's office. Eric Davis in the General Counsel's office at BYU, and I just, my questions are, I'm sorry, I don't understand the difference between the SC3 zone and the ITOD zone, but it sounds like is there a height limitation difference on the structures from one zone to the other? I understand there's a density difference. And then I guess my second question is this the last opportunity for the commission to impose conditions on the construction? Or, okay.
This is preliminary,
Yeah.
just for zoning change.
All right. So I'm hoping.
We'll answer the questions when all they've been asked, then the staff will answer the questions.
Any other comments or questions from the public?
Brian Henry. I work right across the street, Provo resident. I just have a question. I haven't read the zone, so I'm not real familiar with it, but why is only a portion of the project being considered for the zone change and not the entire thing?
Okay, thank you. Staff will address that in a moment. Any other questions or comments from the public? All right, we will close this portion of the hearing to public comment, and I'll ask Mr. Pepperoni to address some of those issues raised.
Thank you. In relation to the very first question, why would community development and economic development want to lead out on something like this? As the Planning Commission knows, to get a zone change in Provo City, we require a developer to spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to roll the dice to see whether or not the city's going to grant a zone change, because we require that much information in engineering and architecture and planning. That's what it costs for those consultants to provide the level of detail that the city asks for, especially on a project this size. Now, this developer has never intended to be the residential builder for this property. So the developer's in the position of trying to market the property for residential uses, which we want to go on the property, but he has to tell them, okay, you need to spend this much money to put the property under contract, then you need to spend another $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 to give the city the information they need just to find out whether or not the city's going to grant you the zone change, which you may not get. Okay, so by the city pre-zoning this property, it takes that unknown out of the equation and makes it much easier for somebody to then be willing to spend that money. Now, the next stage of review will be their project plan review. That's when they will spend that money, and that's when we'll be able to look at architectural details and building heights and floor plans and building materials and parking layout and parking and traffic routes, transportation routes, and trip generation. All of those things will be reviewed next time the Planning Commission sees this, if the zone change is granted by the City Council. Why is only a portion of the property being recommended to be changed? Because the SC3 zone is primarily a commercial zone. That's where the city gets a lot of its tax base, sales tax dollars. The ITOD zone is primarily a residential zone, much less in tax revenue for the city. We'd like to not give up all of our opportunity for commercial on this property. The developer still thinks that that SC3 zone remaining is commercially viable, and he has letters of intent from people who are willing to go forward. So we don't want to give up on that commercial tax base on all the property. The density for the SC3 zone and ITOD zone, it's undefined in both chapters. There is a difference in building height. The ITOD zone allows for a 100-foot building, where SC3 zone is 75 feet. So there is an increase in building height. I think that answers all the questions I was asked, unless I overlooked one.
Thank you. I'll turn it back over to the commissioners. Mr. Rowan?
I have a couple of questions just to add on to that. Is there wisdom in the process of approving it, of setting a minimum? I'm just anxious about not having any minimums. When economic development was originally pitching the idea of changing the SC3 zone from 20% residential to, was it 33? If I remember correctly, part of the vision, as Mr. Holmes talked about it, was, or part of the anxiety we had about it was that, in that 33% of the property, there could be duplexes, or not intense use of the property. And I still have that same anxiety about, what is there that guarantees that there will be an intense residential use of this property? Is there anything we can do, or is there anything?
There are two things we can do. One is that there's, I can't remember, I don't believe there's any pending project within the ITOD zone right now. So this Planning Commission could ask the staff to initiate a code change to have a minimum put into the ITOD zone. That's one way we could handle this. The other way to handle this is to talk to the developer about the density they're imagining and put a minimum in the development agreement.
Would we do that tonight, or is that something we could take care of in the future? The second option.
The second option, I think you need to talk to the developer tonight, because the development agreement will be executed with City Council when the zone change goes to them. So it won't have a chance for Planning Commission to have input on it again. So that might be something you want to get your arms around tonight, if that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be either a minimum number of units or a minimum number of units per acre? Is that, am I getting that right?
It could be either one, but it's up to whatever
I would
Jamie's
just say,
trying to
I think
accomplish.
that I would like to have that conversation as a commission and with staff before I would feel comfortable approving this.
Okay.
What is the total acreage of this property, including the SC3? When you combine the SC3 and the proposed,
It's 35, 36, somewhere around there. There's not in their head, yes, it's 35, 36 acres.
so 14 acres is roughly about what, 40%, 40 to 45% of the total property. So it's it's a higher number than we're imagining. Of course, in this case, we don't give up 33% of all SC3 zones, which was the previous approach that economic development was taking.
Right.
And so I do like that. I like that we're just dealing with this one property. Yeah,
think that's why the Planning Commission originally suggested thinking about I-2D zone, was to not make that change to all SC3 zones.
Right.
This seems like a bigger step in the right direction than the things we've been looking at.
Yeah.
Seems to fit. And this ground has been troubled for a long, long time. I kind of think we need to give them some basis to move forward with something. And I agree with the comments about it being a quality project. I think we need to do that, but.
And I think that's our priority, really.
Yeah, anyone who was at the last Planning Commission meeting knows that we're really concerned about the aesthetics of it. And yeah, I have more to say real quickly, but.
Sorry to interrupt, but just because you mentioned duplexes, single-family homes, those aren't permitted uses currently in the ITOD zone. The least dense residential product you could do is a multiple family dwelling, which in our city code is 4 unit. So a 4-plex would be the least dense product they could do there.
That's helpful.
Good to know. And one of the things that I like about the rezoning proposal, I don't know if we can go back to the sketch of the proposed zone change.
The parcel plan.
The parcel plan, yeah. You know, certainly in my mind, one of the things that's made this such a terribly unsuccessful piece of property is that you had all the commercial back on this part of the property. So it was, you know, hard to see what was back in those, you know, stores. It was nearly impossible to see.
Poor circulation.
Yeah, poor circulation. Driving that parking lot was a nightmare. You had, again, just a sea of asphalt, ugly asphalt, which was a huge barrier. So I love that what happens in the way that this is currently set up is that you push all the commercial to the front of the property where it's visible from the parkway, much more accessible from, I mean, who wants to get off of the UVX and navigate that enormous sea of parking? I mean, that's very hostile towards pedestrians, whereas by putting the residence back here, you push that up, it becomes much less asphalt, much more visible commercial properties. So I really like that. I like also that you have residential that will, Provo is currently exploring, as we know, a redeveloped master plan for the Provo River corridor. I love the idea of putting a bunch of people right here, right at the access of the most usable part of the Provo River. I think that's going to, I really like that idea of, from a livability perspective, people here have access to commercial. They also have access to great recreation right here along the river. I understand the concerns from the studios. I don't share some of those. I think that some of those concerns are not that they're invalid, just that I don't think that they will bear out over time. I don't seem overly. Those concerns don't prompt me to want to halt, nor do the concerns from Mr. Riddle prompt me to want to stop the project. I really like a lot about this, even though it's a higher percentage of residential. If we can make sure that it's higher density and assure that, I would feel really good about it.
I would certainly think it appropriate to move on some of those items, but I do think that we as a planning commission wouldn't want to yet again delay this if we can avoid that, because this, you know, like the last project, I mean, time is money to these people and to the city.
Well,
we have to do it right.
I mean, I would just say that was part of the argument before when we passed it.
No,
the developer didn't move at all. And, you know, that was not our problem.
I agree with you.
No, that's the mix. That's on them. And so for me,
but
I'm not concerned about delaying them because they've delayed themselves plenty.
Well, I think that's a valid argument, but I think that if you clear the decks for someone to put forth a plan now, it gives them something to be able to work with and to be able to present to the city.
I think changing the back portion of that site to ITOD is a good move with the transit investments adjacent to the site. Allowing the SC3 to remain as a good commercial tax base property for the city and to let that be developed. I think issues of density will work their way out as you have to look at things like sewer capacity, how many vehicles can you park on the site, how much rent can I get? Can I build underground parking, or is it going to have to be on the surface? All those things are going to impact how many units you can put there. It's not whatever I feel like it, or maximum. There are site realities that have to be dealt with. I'm sure there's setback requirements from the Provo River, so there's going to be a buffer that's in place from that. And I appreciate that the developer, instead of just drawing parcel lines, has actually made an effort to diagram a street network that will circulate internally on this site and allow for the division of parcels to be developed by himself or others. So, it's the framework's in place. It provides internal circulation, which is totally lacking on the previous shopping center site. So I think this is a big improvement. I would be supportive of the ITOD.
I have a question. Does the Provo River have any public access adjacent to this site? Because it looks like it's largely private.
That's correct.
Under the Provo River Corridor plan that is currently in the process, I mean, the hope would be, I'm sorry, Mr. News. The hope would be to give access, across the street to make it more accessible. So does that make sense? Across the parkway, creating an access point there. So there's not one back here, but close enough so that you can get out your door and to the river trail easily enough.
Gotcha. Maybe the Provo Foundation should consider acquiring some of that land.
That would be an excellent idea.
The other thing that I like, again, just to support what the staff has said, is moving some of our affordable housing out towards this part of Provo rather than having it all cluster around the railroad and the station, I think is a really great thing for the city to push higher density and more affordable into a different part of the city is really good for us.
Require that, yes.
So just to tidy up things before we think about a motion, so your comments, Deborah, to me suggest that you don't feel the need to have any kind of guaranteed minimum density just because of that. You're not concerned about the possibility of a lower density project than we would hope for here.
I think Mr. Ardmore said the code requires at least quadruplex 4-unit buildings. So I think, I'd have to sit down and calculate that out, how many units to the acre, but it's a medium density product. I mean, it could be townhomes or stacked.
From there up to stacked 6-story, apartment buildings. So, yeah.
I mean,
Mr. Holmes.
So the nature, remember, so when they bought this, it was mostly full, so they were paying top dollar. So there's just the economics of the deal would say there needs to be a minimum density to make it work.
Yeah.
And then you can't go too high because then you can't be seas of asphalt again. And so you have to balance all those setbacks, height restrictions, size of the unit. So again, there is that balance. Then the code, whatever the code allows or requires, is what they're going to have to meet. And again, that fourplex is that minimum.
So the property's expensive enough that they're probably going to want to build more than that.
And then probably, again, actually, the more units they can build, the more valuable, but then you have structured parking, and there is not a parking. Again, the old project did have a parking deck right here that was actually very, very big, and the other units here was, again, very big, and all those things now get dispersed over a larger area, still being fairly dense, and again, to that, if they were to come in at 500, that would be that 35 units to the acre, and the previous plan had about, again, 410 as, and part of that was,
Hotel.
yeah, hotel, but anyway, just that.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, further discussion, motion? Ms. Ellsworth?
We have to find some balance between density and what, are we trying to create a range here that the developer could take to Public Works to determine if something in that range will be permissible with the current sewer standards or sewer capacity?
Is it incumbent upon the developer to propose a site plan and then it goes to city engineering to determine whether the capacity is adequate?
That's correct. So part of the project plan, they'll have to provide those numbers. And then Public Works is one of the reviewers of that before it comes to you. So that will get all worked out at a staff level before it comes back to you.
But as far as right now, a site plan would be so theoretical. To me, it's largely meaningless.
Right.
What engineering really needs to know is how many bedrooms and how many bathrooms. They need water connections, right? Well, it's hard for the developer to even come up with that because he has no idea how many 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom, and that and has an impact on your bathrooms.
He doesn't
We're
even
all
have a
just
site
guessing
plan.
until somebody signs up to buy this and says, here's what I intend to build. It's a lot of guesswork.
I believe the zoning proposal that's before us is a result of the hard work and the comments that have been made by previous councils and commissions.
Yeah. I agree.
What was the fourth element that we needed to consider for our?
Sewer system.
Sewer
It
capacity.
was just sewer, okay.
Yeah.
Madam Chairman, I think we should move forward with the zoning as presented with consideration of those 4 items, and I'm willing to make a motion in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Please proceed.
Madam Chairman, I move that we recommend to the Provo City Council, item number 2, that the Provo City Economic Development request a zone change from the Regional Shopping Center S3 zone to interim transit-oriented development zone for approximately 14 acres located at 2300 North University Parkway, Carterville neighborhood, and that we carry through with the recommendations of the staff, that a development agreement be signed and recorded prior to the zone change. And that there's 4 restrictions in here that ought to be acknowledged, including the 4th one being sewer capacity determination.
Okay, let me restate that for us. for the
Thank you.
record. So item 2, Mr. Howard's proposal is that we forward a positive recommendation to municipal council for item 2 as read in with the following conditions: that the remaining SC3 zone will not include any residential uses, that the ITOD zone, 10% of the residential units must be income restricted at 60% average median income, or that a cash in lieu is proffered for 10% of the units, that the attached zoning map be included in the development agreement, which will dictate zone boundaries and road locations. I'll say 4, that a development agreement is signed and recorded prior to establishment of the zone change. And 5, that the sewer system must be capable of handling capacity of any proposed density of development.
So moved.
Do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Rowan. All those in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation for item 2?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Right, then that was unanimous. We'll forward a positive recommendation to council for item 2. All right, that concludes all the items to be heard this evening. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Mr. Rowan, a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. We are now adjourned. Which one?